As a very young girl, I think I attempted to write a novel when I was in the 7th grade, and I think that project probably lasted about 2 days. So that was my very first attempt at serious writing. I was always an artist, but I was a visual artist for a long, long time. And I do still draw and paint and so on. But when I was in high school, I kind of got kidnapped by William Faulkner. And I read Absalom, Absalom, and it was all over for me. The written word was it. And but when I was 16 years old, I was at a lecture, and there was a woman journalist, and I don't know who she was. I don't remember anything about what she said in this talk. But at the very end of the talk, I was very self-absorbed, as many 16-year-olds are. At the very end of the talk, someone said to her, "What advice would you give to a young girl just starting out in life?" And she said, "I would tell her to keep a journal." And that clicked for me somehow. So I went out that afternoon and I bought myself a hardbound book with no lines on the pages. And I started keeping a journal very, very irregularly, and it took me about 9 years to fill the first journal that I kept. And during that time, I went to college and I majored in English. I went to Indiana University, majored in English, and I also got a degree in child development at LSU. And I wasn't very happy as a nursery school teacher. And eventually I came here to Nebraska. And I wasn't a writer, and I didn't intend to be a poet or a writer. I was a medievalist, and I was a scholar, and that was what I was going to do. But my first job was that I worked as a reader at the Prairie Schooner. And so I would sit there and I would open these, well, I didn't open them, but I would look at these manuscripts, and they would come in from some really good writers. Some of the best writers in the country, of course, are sending things to Prairie Schooner all the time. And I looked at this stuff and I said to myself, I write stuff as good as this in my journal. I can do this. I can do this. So I began to write, and initially I had a tremendous response to my writing. I'd been writing poetry about a year, maybe a year and a half, and I won the Vreelands Award, and I won a scholarship to Breadloaf in the first year and a half that I wrote. And then I didn't win anything else for 10 years. Every 10 years I win a prize. I win a fairly good prize, and usually the prize is about $300. So I figure that I make about $30 a year on my writing, but of course I spend much more than that on computer paper and utilities and Bic pens and things like that. So I don't make any money at it, but that's how I became a writer. I'm going to read a short story, and I'm going to read from a play that I've been working on, but it doesn't really sound like a play as I read it, because in order to write a play, I wasn't able to leave my own voice out of it. So I've had to write this play sort of novelistically, and then when it comes time for it to be a play, then I have to drop out all of the direction, and we'll see if anybody can do anything with it. But the play is called Dostoevsky and Hal. And the idea for this play came out of some dinners that I had last year with my boyfriend, who is a real adamant and outspoken communist. And we have a very dear friend who is a Russian physicist, and he's really just a very devoted capitalist. I mean, he really wants nothing more than to abandon physics and work for a Swedish lumber company that builds prefab houses. And so now with the demise of communism in Russia, Sergei is going to make a lot of money. But we would go to dinner, my American communist boyfriend and my my Russian capitalist friend. We would go to dinner at the Imperial Palace, and they would have these incredible conversations. Of course, I didn't have a tape recorder, but my little mind is whirring away the whole time. And so in this play, Dostoevsky and Hal, it's a debate, but the bulk of the play is a debate between Dostoevsky's Grand Inquisitor from Brothers Karamazov and a number of 20th century Marxist writers who are, sort of resurrected and they go to hell and they have this debate. But it comes out of those dinners, out of those great dinners. My dinners with Sergei, we'll call them. And these are for my dear friend. This one's called Ocean. Hilda Raz says these are not my best work, by the way. Sorry, but anyway, things will get better. Ocean. Something warm is rising round us. We are becoming beachfront property. Our mother, the salt sea, is lapping at our poetic flesh. Something is deep and tidal, nightly as the sky we swim in all our one life, and no one to say just why. Something is running out like rays of glory from the saffron and rose of a backlit cloud. Something is reflecting. Something is revealed. Some star dawns one more time on the wet breast of some world. This one's called Gift. You shouldered underemployment 20 years ago. Took it like the mensch you are. Gave back an eye for an eye and plenty of cheek. Your whole face on TV every day, you old non-commercial media project, you. Likewise, the gift, so easy for me to neglect. How your telephone's ring is slowly ceasing to mean that name of names. Likewise, the woman smiling some dozen years ago I saw on O Street into the face of her blinded lover. Likewise, the daily benedict of the sun on the inorganic sea. These things are not, while I can witness, wasted. And finally, place. Long time ago, and Greg will remember this, I used to like to write sonnets, and no one else did. And then after a while, sonnets became fashionable, and then I couldn't write them anymore. But now I wrote a sonnet. After many, many, many years, I've written another sonnet. So this is a sonnet, and it's called Place. A pious Jew makes sure the table's set with an extra place in case Messiah should happen to drop in for dinner yet. It is not so much an expectation, the plate, the empty and eloquent chair, as a sweet, suggestive invitation. Likewise, the tongue-tied poet waits the word, the suffering wait for justice, dark waits light, the shoulder of the saint waits for the bird. Dear man, I would not make of you a god, you are that precious to me in the flesh. I'm ready. Aaron, waiting for the rod. Always a place in my arms, my heart, my head. Always for you, a pillow on my bed. Usually when I read a poem by somebody else, and I'm very pleased this evening to share with you a poem by my son, Sean. And Sean said to me that I should read this in the middle, not at the beginning and not at the end, and I should read it in the middle, and he said that I should wave to him for when we're on TV. So, hi, Shawnee. And this poem is called Mount Rushmore. And honest, I didn't edit. This is his poem. Mount Rushmore, where it was a mountain, where they made the heads of presidents, where they shouldn't, where some great Indian workers used to live. Okay, so now while you guys still have your stamina, we're going to plunge into Dostoevsky and Hal. And poor Greg's read this already, so this isn't going to be a surprise to him. But anyway, it's a taxing piece, I warn you, and this is the day after taxes are due, so maybe this is a good time to read it. Dostoevsky and Hal, and it's supposed to be a 5-act play. When I told some friends of mine who are theater people, they go, 5 acts? Nobody writes anything but 3 acts these days. And well, Shakespeare used to write 5-act plays. Shakespeare. So anyway, I've got almost 4 acts done on this beast, and I'm not going to read straight through, but I'm going to read some from Acts 1 and 2 and 3. So here we go. Dostoevsky and Hal. Dostoevsky is seated at a large round table in the anteroom of Hell, an early Victorian parlor with dark red paper on the walls, heavy woodwork, massive plum-colored drapes, and velvet upholstery. He's incredibly agitated. Like a man who cannot get warm, he keeps blowing into his cupped hands. He is waiting to see the devil, with whom he has an appointment. There is nothing to look at upon the walls but allegorical steel engravings in the style of Blake's imitators, poor scratchy things in cheap gilt frames. On the table is an album of family pictures, pressed flowers, locks of severed hair. And there is also a humidor, as it happens, full of excellent cigars, he discovers. He has been waiting such a long time. Surely it must be over an hour already. He checks his watch. It seems to be keeping time. He is certain the message said 6 o'clock. The cigars must be for guests. Surely they mean him to help himself. He selects a thinnish, moderately rich Cuban cigar, trims the ends with a silver patented gadget which fits cleverly into a central well of the humidor. It is knife and pipe tool in one. He looks for matches. There are none in the humidor unless it has a secret compartment. He searches the whole room. Window ledges behind the plum-colored drapery, the big jug of peacock feathers on the piano. He looks into all of the cabinets and drawers. He feels down into the crevices in the upholstery but finds nothing but a little grit. He thinks of moving the settee out from the wall a bit and looking back behind, but he is afraid for the knees of his trousers. And he doesn't want the devil to find him looking ridiculous. If he should walk in and find Dostoevsky with his head stuck behind the couch, then jumping up in consternation and probably upsetting an end table with its costly, vulgar lamp, it would start things off badly. And Dostoevsky feels at a disadvantage as it is. There are cut glass decanters labeled Oporto, Brandy, and Jerez on a fumed oak sideboard, but no glasses in the room. He is sure, having just searched it thoroughly. One might just take a quick pull straight from the neck, but there again, he doesn't want to be uncomfortably surprised. Just when he's given up all hope, his host appears. "Fedor Mikhailovich," says the devil, standing in the doorway. Dostoevsky feels like jumping out of his skin. It is the same fellow, the one who plagued Ivan so in the Brothers Karamazov. He is wearing the same checked trousers and shabby coat. He has the same pinched, worldly, unctuous way about him. He shakes a finger at Dostoevsky playfully as if to say, "Where have you been, stranger?" Dostoevsky rises to his feet. Should he bow? That seems sacrilegious at best, possibly a mortal sin. Perhaps a slight inclination of his head, just enough to signal recognition, but no deference. Then he could turn his profile to the devil, showing positive disdain. His poor head is starting to ache already. The tendons in his neck he can feel becoming wires. In the end, he just stands there. "It's so good to see you here," says the devil. "And what an evening it will be, what an entertainment. I've always prided myself on my hospitality, despite what people think. My great gift is for collecting genius, you know. The constellations of sheer talent I've brought together for everyone's amusement." He sighs deeply, as if for his sentimental past. "I don't understand at all why my presence is necessary," says Dostoevsky anxiously. "As if we could get along without you. At this late date?" The note mentioned potential copyright violations, some irregularity, and there's to be some sort of a public performance? A debate, let us call it. "But I lost all control over my oeuvre and my estate when I died." "But not your interest, eh? Come, Dostoevsky, you might have refused after all, or caught the wrong bus, or been down with one of your sick headaches, Well, yes. I won't deny a little curiosity. There, you see. Of your own free will you came here. As between gentlemen, you agree? Now look here. I'm not about to sign anything. I was guaranteed safe passage. Fyodor Mikhailovich, I am desolated. What do you take me for? You shall certainly sleep your dreamless angelic sleep in your own little bed tonight. I ought to know better than to trust you. You haven't any choice now. Oh my, here you are with a stone-cold cigar in your trembling hand. Couldn't you find a light? Well, actually, the devil whips a match out of his pocket and strikes it on the mantel. Then, with a flourish and a bow, he holds it under Dostoevsky's nose. Dostoevsky hesitates, thinking of Persephone, whose tragic error was nothing more than a matter of a few pomegranate seeds. But the cigar would fortify him, he thinks. Should he ask for a glass of Jerez, maybe? I was promised safe passage, he thinks comfortably. He inclines his head slightly and allows his cigar to be lit. A quick drink before the others arrive, suggests the devil. It's as if the devil can read his thoughts, thinks Dostoevsky. Of course I can, says the devil, pushing on the frame of one of the awful engravings, which revolves in the wall to reveal a flock of heavy crystal on graduated shelves, like a family of bright, transparent seagulls on a series of cliffs. What hideous glasses, thinks Dostoevsky, inhaling the heady draft of his cigar. Damn, he says, blushing, for he has realized that the devil has heard this too. And you should blush too, says the devil, for it is your own fault. What is? The fact that I'm stupid and banal. The devil is pouring a sherry for Dostoevsky and another for himself. He looks up at Dostoevsky in complete candor. An oily-looking tear starts from the corner of either eye. Why, what do you mean? You made me tasteless, Fyodor Mikhailovich. At least that has been the consensus of readers. Surely you don't mean to deny me. Dostoevsky is dumbfounded. I had no idea, he says slowly. Yes? Why, says Dostoevsky, that there could be this kind of repercussion. The devil laughs loudly and long. But you act as if you have some claim on me. You portray. You are a rhetorical device. I have being. I lived. I was real. The devil laughs again. Dostoevsky, you and I are artifacts. Purely biographical criticism has been discredited, surely. And I am not limited by your intentions, my good man. By 1,000 other qualities, yes. Your idiolect and your fluency, your resonance, your class and its political agenda, your depth of character, if you will. But it has been scientifically proven, in short, it is axiomatic, that your conscious intentions do not limit me or my possibilities in any significant way. Dostoevsky is brought up short. But I lived. I was flesh and blood. Why, there are photographs of me. Thin, very thin. Photographs are artifacts, too. The devil is increasingly peevish. Dostoevsky is sure he is growing bored. Dostoevsky is insulted a bit. Grow bored with him. And he not to say the, but certainly one of the greatest writers of all time. Take care, he scolds himself. That's hubris. Oh, I don't know, says the devil. Other people come in Act One. There's an American, Big Bill Haywood, who was active in the IWW, and 4 neo-Marxists, Herbert Marcuse, Theodore Adorno, Max Horkheimer, and who's my fourth one? Oh, Walter Benjamin show up, and of course the Grand Inquisitor, and they talk and a lot, and we're going to jump ahead to Act Two because I can't read this much. Dostoevsky is sitting, it happens, next to Max Horkheimer when the latter rises and says, "Ah, yes, the famous sentimental freedom of the poor, the beautiful virtuous past where once poverty was an estate. Then it became a panic. The poor were supposed to run and shove each other aside like a crowd in a burning auditorium. The way out was the factory gate, labor for the entrepreneurs. There can never be enough of the poor. Their numbers are a blessing for capital, not incidentally why the ruling class is so repelled by apportions and prophylactics. And then there are the men like yourself," he looks directly at the Inquisitor, who is still standing like a statue on his own tomb. The room is beginning to smell very faintly of sulfur. "Sorry about that," Fyodor Mikhailovich, whispers the devil. "I'll order the servant to create a draft. Just part of dwelling in this neighborhood. You must forgive our little rural eccentricities. We don't have your advantages." "Shh," Haywood admonishes. Horkheimer has begun to speak again. "You have a priceless gift for dealing with the opposition. You are prepared to proclaim," he's speaking to the Grand Inquisitor, of course, "you are prepared to proclaim the greatest incoherence as a virtue to the crowd and to yourself. Nihilism and self-contempt, these are the necessary qualities." Arguing ad hominem, the devil points out. "Mankind is not betrayed by the untimely attempts of revolutionaries, but by the timely attempts of the realists. Nothing on earth can any longer justify violence except the necessity of putting an end to violence itself. If you are right that after the fall of the machinery of terror, chaos will reign, not just for a moment, but until a new form of terrorist oppression takes over, then humanity is lost. But think, in order to conduct their affairs in solidarity with one another, people will have to change their natures much less than they have already been changed by fascism. The narrow-minded and cunning creatures that call themselves men will someday be seen as caricatures, masks behind which a better possibility decays." Narrow-minded and cunning, thinks Dostoevsky. That's Smerdyakov exactly. Dostoevsky is enjoying himself enormously now. That phrase, the machinery of terror, that was fine, says Dostoevsky to Horkheimer, who sits down and wipes his face with a large, beautifully laundered handkerchief. "I felt as if I was being ground up in just such a machine when I was imprisoned in my youth." "Yes?" Horkheimer looks incomprehending, as if a joke's been made which he doesn't get. "Oh, I was a great utopian in my youth." Horkheimer sees the light. That's right. I knew that, forgive me. My mind is all taken up with these matters here before us, and excuse me, please, a minute. I must just lean over and say a word to Adorno in private, you know." Dostoevsky feels the edge of his glow diminish. He wants Horkheimer to ask for the story of the firing squad. And after all, a socially responsible person would have made a bridge of conversation upon the subject. Not that Dostoevsky wishes to be thought a socialist himself, but he doesn't want to relinquish that romantic flavor early radicalism gives to his person. "The dread and intelligent spirit, the spirit of self-destruction and non-being," thunders the Inquisitor, the lights dimming. "The great spirit was with you in the wilderness. It has been passed on to us in books. Supposedly he tempted you. But was it possible to say anything more true than what he proclaimed to you in those 3 questions, which you rejected?" And the miracle lay precisely in the appearance of those 3 questions. By the questions alone one can see that one is dealing with a mind not human and transient, but eternal and absolute. For in these 3 questions, all of subsequent human history is as if brought together into a single whole and foretold. 3 images are revealed that will take in all the insoluble historical contradictions of human nature all over the earth. Decide for yourself who was right, you or the one who questioned you then. Recall the first question. Its meaning, though not literally, was this: you are going into the world empty-handed with some promise of freedom which they, in their simplicity and innate lawlessness, cannot even comprehend, which they dread and fear. But do you see these stones in this bare, scorching desert? Turn them into bread, and mankind will run after you like sheep. You rejected the offer. What sort of freedom is it, you reasoned, if obedience is bought with loaves of bread? You objected that man does not live by bread alone, but do you know that in the name of this very earthly bread, the dread spirit will rise forever against you and fight with you and defeat you, and everyone will follow him, exclaiming, "Who can compare to this beast, for he has given us fire from heaven?" Do you know that centuries will pass and mankind will proclaim with the mouth of its wisdom and science that there is no crime and therefore no sin, but only hungry men? Feed them first, then ask virtue of them. Your temple will be destroyed, and in its place the terrible Tower of Babel will be raised again. Like the former one, this one will not be completed, and to us they will come after suffering for 1,000 years with their tower, crying out, "Feed us!" For those who promised us fire from heaven did not give it. And then we shall finish building their tower, for only he who feeds them will finish it, and we shall lie to them that it is in the name of love. Oh, never will they feed themselves without us. No science will give them bread as long as they remain free. In the end, they will say, "Better that you enslave us, but feed us." They will finally understand that freedom and earthly bread in plenty for everyone are inconceivable together, for never, never will they be able to share among themselves. You promise them heaven, but can it compare with earthly bread in the eyes of the weak, eternally depraved, and eternally ignoble human race? And if thousands and tens of thousands follow you, what will become of the millions and tens of millions who will not be strong enough? Is it that only the great and strong are dear to you, and the remaining millions, numerous as the sands of the sea, the weak ones, should only serve as material for the great and the strong? No. The weak, too, are dear to us. They are depraved and rebels, but in the end it is they who will become obedient. They will marvel at us and look upon us as gods. Ah, Bartleby, sighs the devil, ah, humanity. Dostoevsky finds himself growing a little melancholy. His headache, he discovers, has not left him, but has only been masked by the drinks, which seem now to be wearing off. And this inquisitor is terrifying. But what he says is absolutely true, Fyodor Mikhailovich, says the devil. You should be filled with self-congratulation, but look at you, as depressed as a little dog in the rain. Even the truth can be taken too seriously, Dostoevsky. It isn't right to take these speeches out of context, says Dostoevsky. I never meant them to stand on their own. This inquisitor, and you too for that matter, are inventions of a character, an imperfect if brilliant character coming to pieces under the strain of longings incompatible with his own rationality. By the end of the novel, Ivan is quite mad. The devil shakes his head as if in pity. You said yourself you lost control of your work long ago. The Brothers Karamazov was your last, and many say your most important novel. It is your monument, and yet it lives folded into the cortex of readers and writers everywhere on earth. It's now been translated into what? More than many dozens of languages at least. Each translation, each deconstruction, each allusion and borrowing, conscious or unconscious, with benefit of footnotes or not, extends its being in the world. It belongs to the tissue of human experience. It will not perish until the sun burns down to a cinder and the earth, smashed by asteroids and scattered, is flotsam on the foaming cosmic tide. We're going to skip to Act 3. In the meantime, I'm passing over one of my personal favorite scenes, which is when the Grand Inquisitor does a striptease and reveals himself to be Joseph Stalin. So, anyway, with a real bump and grind, I hope it comes off well on the stage. But anyway, Dostoevsky faints then, you see, and then Act 3 begins. Dostoevsky is coming around. It is exactly like reverse motion picture footage of water running down a drain. Dostoevsky feels himself turning and turning in a widening gyre, and with a breath and a conviction, pop! Out he is borne into consciousness one more time. He is, however, unrefreshed. He is lying on the settee. It is a red mohair plush, prickly with a faint air of mildew, and he sits up as soon as he is able. The devil and his servant have been hovering with wet towels and smelling salts. Water, Dostoevsky says, helpless as a chick. What a nuisance, deplores the devil. The one liquor I'm afraid it is impossible to procure in these parts. Of course, we've tried to bottle the little groundwater that survives deep percolation, but it's black as rinse water and full of those horrid nitrates besides. Here, damn it, says Haywood. I want some coffee, see? The servant enters immediately with a fragrant pitcher full, cups and saucers, sugar and cream. The works, says Haywood with satisfaction. Very good, Mr. Haywood, says the devil. You're not above a little hocus-pocus yourself, I see. He holds his head coyly to one side. Just my natural sympathies with the workers, see? I'm just taking a little control of the means of production is all. See, Fyodor Mikhailovich, says the devil solicitously, look what fun the others are having. Even that impossible American is unbending. Why, he made a joke. But look at you. Had a little too much to drink, did we? Here, Haywood hands Dostoevsky a cup of coffee without another word. It is hot and very strong, served in one of those impossible confections, paper-thin porcelain with a wholly inadequate ear, so the coffee keeps slopping over as Dostoevsky fidgets, seeking to keep the knuckle of his index finger from scalding against the cup. I should like to pick up Adorno's knitting, begins Marcuse, with the bankruptcy of your program, which is not to suggest that my colleague has dropped his stitch. Marcuse bows to Adorno, who bows in return. It's just a dream come true for me, Fyodor Mikhailovich, simpers the devil. Haywood growls. You are about to speak of mystery, if I am not mistaken? I am, admits Stalin. By which in your time, of course, you mean technics, is it not? Vous avez raison. Bien. May I take the liberty of pointing out to you that technics, by itself, can promote authoritarianism as well as liberty, scarcity as well as abundance, the extension as well as the abolition of toil. You have neglected to mention that the war economy is the normal state of your ordering of the social and economic process. Technology itself is one of the chief stimuli for this, and therefore for a new rationality and new standards of individuality. 300 or 400 years ago, the individual was subject to standards and values no external authority was supposed to encroach upon, which pertain to forms of life adequate to fullest human development. By the same token, these forms were the truth of his or her individual and social experience. It was each person's job to find these forms and make them actual. Society's job was to grant such freedoms and then get out of the way. In any radically Puritan context, such as your own, individuals are set against society. The model is a battle. Each one must break through the whole system of ideas to rational self-interest. Since human resources are always limited, efficiency has always called for unity and simplicity, curtailing waste, avoiding detours, called in short for radical coordination. A contradiction exists, however, between the profit incentive that keeps the apparatus moving and the rise of the standard of living which this same apparatus is supposed to make possible. It is, after all, a no-net gain universe. On this at least we are agreed, and to Dostoevsky's surprise, they are. Marcuse goes on. Individuality has not disappeared, though individual achievement has been transformed into standardized efficiency. The facts directing man's thought and action are not those of nature, which must be accepted in order to be mastered, or those of society, which must be changed because they no longer correspond to human needs and potentials. Rather, they are those of the machine, which itself appears as the embodiment of rationality and expediency. The countryside is shaped and organized by the highway. Numerous signs and posters tell the traveler what to do and think. They even request his attention to the beauties of nature or the hallmarks of history. Others have done the thinking for him, perhaps for the better. And all this is indeed for his benefit, safety, and comfort. He receives what he wants. Business, technics, human needs, and nature are welded together into one rational and expedient mechanism. He will fare best who follows its direction. All protest against the machine is senseless, and the individual who would insist on his freedom of action is a crank. Everything cooperates to turn human instincts, desires, and thoughts into channels that feed the apparatus. Men are stripped of individuality not by external compulsion, but by the very rationality under which they live. Reason, defined in the system of life created by modern industry, becomes equivalent to an activity which perpetuates the military-industrial world. You have managed to transform rationality from a critical force into one of adjustment and compliance. As the laws and mechanisms of machine reason spread over the whole society, they develop a set of truth values of their own which hold good for the functioning of the apparatus and for that alone, and this is the price of your earthly bread. Just then, a loud knocking and commotion is heard at the outer door. The servant rushes to admit the newcomers, a large, stern-faced man in a long, dark gray cloak, who is accompanied by a half-dozen ragged persons of African descent, apparently a family group, a pregnant woman and her 3 little ones, a crone, and a middle-aged man, all painfully thin. The servant speaks privately with the cloaked man for a moment, then turns to the gathering and says, "Captain Charon has a bit of an emergency on his hands, if you please, sir." The captain turns to Stalin. "Haitian boat people, sir," he begins. "I'm in charge here," asserts the devil to Dostoevsky. "I had so hoped to keep these topical references to a minimum." "Just what is it exactly these people want?" the devil asks the captain. "They have come in a boat because they have nothing to eat. Cash cropping, overfishing to extinction, and the irreducible need for fuel has made their island paradise into a stone. All the rainfall runs away like bitter tears because there is no fundament, no cared-for reserve of organic treasure. It is all washed away, fallen forever into the floor of the sea. If the dinosaurs could rise again in their lush, redolent swamps, perhaps another tropical age could restore Haiti. Otherwise, there seems nothing for it but a Marshall Plan to rebuild after the failures of Haiti's many martial laws, this time with environmental engineers mounting the helm. The problem, sir, is these people. They are not technically dead." "Please, sir," says the little ragged man, "it has happened thus. I found them floating in the river Styx, awash in their leaky boat, weeping, shaking with fevers, foul and begrimed," intones Charon. "Please, I beg you, let us speak for ourselves," says the little man. "As he say, the island of our nativity is become a stone. Rice, beans, squashes, bananas can hardly grow. We go prostrate ourselves on the altar before God Almighty. We ask the priest to bless us, and what do the priest he say? He say, 'Domine, Domine, go my children, sweat and suffer, and the Lord he will provide.' And lo, the Lord, he provides for us one maniac after another. A longer, more insufferable string of maniacs than the people of Haiti have had for king shit. It is not to be found elsewhere in the Caribbean basin, possibly the Americas entire. Though it's not good to boast. I'll be sure to bring the evil eye down on myself with my gossip here." He stops and begins again to breathe. Dostoevsky breathes with him. Dostoevsky thinks this man has never made such a speech before in his life. Dostoevsky suddenly realizes that relative to him, to this man, he himself is a ghost. He wonders if the ragged man knows this. "He knows, but he is too distracted to care," puts in the devil. Dostoevsky is not sure he envies this man, even if he is alive. After all, one in whom the life force is strong does not normally find himself at death's door, which description Dostoevsky feels suits this room very well. "You are wrong there, Fyodor Mikhailovich. This is one of the sturdiest, or he would never have brought his family this far even. The weak died long ago in Haiti. The healthy died yesterday. Tonight, death is carrying off the strong." "Beg pardon, sir, but it is not I who have brought our family thus far. I am only Aaron to our Moses, my mother-in-law, Madame Inez." The crone hobbles forward and bows with dignity. She mumbles something shyly with her hand over her mouth. "You must forgive her," she says. "Her teeth have gone and she is ashamed." Haywood is moved and jumps to his feet, offering her his chair. She is startled, then a little overcome, then with a graceful nod sits wearily down. "The boat, the poor leaky thing which brought us to your shore, we tried to patch it with 2-liter bottles split and pounded flat, and tape. Duct tape, you know, American duct tape? Good stuff. Only the salt eats through after a while. Plus, how could we know we'd be in the water so many days?" "You were becalmed then?" asks Benjamin. Dostoevsky sees a tear glistening behind his wire rims. "No one will have us. And why? Because they have no love for the poor, no pity, no mercy, no stomach. Because their own army of poor is growing nightly beneath the freeway ramps, in blasted buildings and cardboard Reaganvilles. Because they are afraid we will infect them with AIDS. Because we can't speak English. Because we are black." The crone beckons her son-in-law to her and speaks to him behind her hand. As I say, it was Madame Inez who brought us out of Haiti in her little skiff, the one she inherits when her husband dies so long ago. This is when my wife is but a child herself. Madame Inez is a fisher. She has raised her family with only the help of the Virgin and this shitty little boat. Our fathers we have left sleeping on stones. Crossing the water, we broke down on the coast. But what hurts the most when the people there said, "You better keep moving on." I remember hearing of some refugees from Europe, Jews, after the great pogroms, the camps and ovens. In a boat like us, the world watching, they went from port to port. At last, I think some sovereign took them in. We have not been so fortunate. After exhausting every avenue, Madame Inez declared our little boat would not cross the sea, much less survive the awful journey to the heavenly shore. The crone says something loudly. The little man nods. She says, "Everyone told us to go to hell. Very well, to hell we have come. The devil can't refuse us after all." There is a very uncomfortable pause. "How awkward," says the devil. "I'm afraid I can't help you. I haven't really got the authority to..." Well, never mind. The point is, it is impossible. Actually, my voice is really present in the other longer piece that I'm going to read, which is a story called The Neighborhood. So, I don't know about my poetry. I think I've written some pretty good poems, and I think that it was really instructive for me to begin as a poet because I learned that every word is important. But I'm not really very happy with the poetry that I'm writing anymore, and it was kind of it was a piece of work to dredge up some poems that I felt comfortable reading for this audience. But I think that my real voice began to emerge as I began to write fiction. In 1983, I was finishing up my PhD at UNL, and my mother died. And I was very sad about that. She died in February, and that summer, between my last class I taught at UNL and the first class I taught at a school in Minnesota where I went to teach, I had 8 weeks. And I decided that I was going to cheer myself up, and the way that I was going to do it was I was going to write funny stories. So I started writing short stories, and I wrote one a week for those 8 weeks. And many of those stories are they're all voice stories. Every one of them is a first-person story. I don't think I can write a story well, I can hardly write a story that's not in first person, although this Dostoevsky and Hal is an attempt to do that. But for a long time I wrote in male voices, and that, I think, was helpful to me because because I mostly had always written except for poetry, I'd mostly always written in my journals. So I was trying to learn how to fictionalize, so I took a fiction, had to make up a first-person character, and so that helped me to use male voices. And then at a certain point I decided I was going to use my mother's voice for a number of stories. But then, somewhere along the line, I took a risk, and I wrote a couple of stories in, I would say, my own voice. And the story, The Neighborhood, that I'm going to read tonight is one of those stories. It's the most recent one that I've written that I would say is really my own voice. Well, I'm like everybody else. You know, I have these certain obsessions. One of my obsessions is how wars come home to roost, and I would say that a lot of my short stories deal with how our adventurism, how our military adventurism in other countries comes home. I don't ever write directly about the war in Vietnam, but I have a lot of stories that sort of deal with aftermaths or wounded characters and so on. I am very interested in the neighborhoods that I've lived in. In fact, the story, The Neighborhood, is certainly an obsessional piece. I am probably always struggling with, things like relationships and what is our proper relation to nature. And I find one of the reasons I don't really like my poetry that much anymore is that I've become so didactic in my poetry, and I don't really like didactic poetry myself, and I seem unable to write anything but didactic poetry, so I sort of, I don't want to write it anymore because I don't like it, but many of my obsessions are political, I would say. So, now you can take off your shoes. A short story, The Neighborhood. The last place we lived was a handsome brick duplex across the street from a fashionable park. Our landlords were a couple of uppies who'd bought the place as a tax shelter. Themselves, they preferred the glassy, languid suburbs to the southeast, but they'd bought the duplex as a curiosity. Immaculate, intensely decorated and landscaped by the gay couple who'd owned it before them as a fixer-upper. Poor uppies, helpless in the hands of the chatty real estate lady, never thought to ask about the water stains and moss on the west wall of the basement. They'd been so taken by the antique maid's toilet down there with its nickel-plated chain and oak reservoir hung quaintly high on the wall. By the time the tax laws changed so that the duplex was no longer such a cozy place for their money, they'd also tumbled to the fact that landlording was a lot of work and expense. What with gutters to be cleaned and elderly radiators to be coaxed to life, not to mention water and maybe asbestos in the basement, and so they decided to sell, handing the duplex over to the same confiding woman who'd sold it to them. The bottom had by this time dropped out of the market, and since they'd bought absurdly high and were stoutly unwilling to take the loss, their asking price took on a fictional quality which seemed awfully amusing to the so-called buyers who drifted through during our last months in the apartment, usually when we wanted to eat or argue or make love. Unluckier still, the poor uppies had begun to build in the last flush of what they'd clearly mistaken for everlasting affluence. Their dream house, as described to me, sounded like the very twin of their then current dwelling, a large split level on a street named after one of Sir Walter Scott's heroines. So they found themselves now possessed of too many homes, or parts of homes, and the only one they could sell was the one we were living in. Since the dream house was still under construction, lacking amenities, plumbing, a roof, etc., they decided to evict us from the lower half of the duplex and move in themselves. I'd hired a cleaning service to come in the afternoon we shipped out to be sure of getting back my extravagant deposit. I was meeting the owners at 8. The light in August at that hour is just right, long and solid gold coming in off the tops of the oaks on the other side of the park. I was already homesick, pacing slowly across the beautiful pale floors, blowing on our patch and paint jobs on the handsome colored walls, every cupboard and closet standing open, every nickel-plated fixture gleaming quietly, the whole echoing softly the little songs I sang. The uppies arrived at 5 past. He thought it was just tip-top. She knew fair was fair, as a woman could appreciate the depth of cleaning, and wrote me out a check on the spot for the full amount. It was obvious the whole thing was heavy on her, but he was one of these, oh, what an adventure types. You mean there's really no heat in the back room? She appealed to me, as if I'd been kidding her all those times last winter when I'd called to complain. None, I said with satisfaction. Of course, you can bring in an electric heater, his advice to me, but the bills are sky high. Luckily, it's a very solar room, and I mostly used to write back there in the afternoons, a couple of sweaters and a pot of tea, and you'll be okay. Although, I continued maliciously, I understand you'll be using this as the master bedroom? We'll order a great big down quilt from Beans, he said, rubbing his hands together as if he could already feel the chill. Great, she said, and turned sourly away. She wandered down the hall to the bathroom. No shower, she said. Honey. I gotta go, I said. Then I drove back across town to the new neighborhood where my husband and his brother sat in a wreckage of pizza and beer and exhaustion, listening to our friend Cocktail Shorty pound out gospel and R&B on the landlady's upright piano, his cigarette burning down carefully on the ledge of the music shelf. At midday, when I'd called our new landlady to make sure she was ready for us, she'd asked me to hold off coming until 1. "I realized this morning that I was ready," she told me briskly. "Really, really ready to move." "Great," I said enthusiastically. We arrived at one with our crew and the first of two 14-foot truckloads to find the landlady, still brisk, beautiful salt and pepper hair swept back from her brow, standing in the dining room with 3 empty cardboard boxes, talking wildly. Personally, I couldn't imagine how she could bear to leave the place, an exquisitely restored bungalow, 100 years old exactly, with enormous airy rooms, ceramic fireplace, perfect woodwork the color of a blood bay horse. Nothing at all was packed, not one thing. So, when she said she was ready, I explained later to my husband, who didn't care anymore, apparently she'd meant spiritually. My landlady is the oldest hippie I know. She went with one young lover to the Chicago riots of 1968. 10 years later got busted with another young lover for possession of skunk weed and spent 6 weeks in a Guatemalan jail, and came home with a few lice, some great shirts, and a dynamite set of journal entries. Once her neighbor, editor of a high-tone literary journal, invited Allen Ginsberg to town for a reading, then could not persuade his mistress to have the party because she'd heard that the great man, when drunk, did not scruple to pee on people's drapes. So my landlady threw the party, and of course Ginsberg was a perfect gentleman. The drapes survived unscathed, and the real bad-to-the-bone get-down party took place the next night over in T-Town where the blacks and students lived. But that's another story. What we did was we moved in on top of her. 2 brothers began to unload our stuff as fast as they could into the 2 front bedrooms. The other brother and cocktail shorty started putting the landlady's stuff into boxes any which way. Her furniture we stashed where we could, attic, cellar, back bedroom, the Camp River pickup. She strode back and forth, gesturing with her big brown hands, talking and talking, picking up a pillow, a clock, a book, setting them down somewhere else. I should have been expecting this after her garage sale of the month before. Actually, there had been 2 sales. For the first, my husband and I, 6 months pregnant, helped her carry out to the front yard a litter of ugly couches and daybeds and several bedroom suites, suitable to dismal rented rooms, all of which she priced outrageously high. Then it rained all weekend. It was cool for July, and I had to keep supplementing my own clothes with socks, sweater, windbreaker, faded and mismatched from her sale table, keeping her company all day. Luckily, she had 6 or 7 years of old Rolling Stone magazines and a half-dozen issues of Evergreen, honest-to-God collector's items. The second garage sale took place a week later. Meanwhile, the overpriced sofas and mattresses mildewed in the front yard under plastic drop cloths. The veneers of the night tables and wardrobes loosened and curled. Ultimately, she had to pay a man to help her haul most of it away. Nobody but another landlord would want it, and nobody, period, was about to be gouged like she was expecting. On the other hand, when a stout, handsome fellow, big mustache, and Indiana Jones slouch hat stopped by on his bicycle to ask if she had any old books, she practically gave him a complete set of Thackeray, 1898, half-calf, exquisite end papers. He was a dealer, of course. $25, imagine. So by the end of the day, when Tyrese came sniffing around from next door to see what was left, I was pressing her to take any and all offers. A tall, slack-faced man bent to finger a ratty orange rug, fake oriental from Kresge's, circa 1965. I grew up with one just like it. He asked would she take $10 for it. $10! Like she'd been gut shot. Have you got any idea what a rug costs new? Why, she'll take it, I said. Oh, do you think I really ought to? She said. She was actually wringing her hands. The tall man looked at her uneasily, hand fumbling as if for his fly, but then slid into his pocket instead and came out with a 20. I can make change, I said quickly. Oh, maybe I should just put it all in storage, she said wildly. Oh, I have so much to do. Sometimes I think I'll never get back to the coast. A group of Oriental graduate students descended on us like so many grackles, picking and talking to themselves, busy in the boxes, then surging around us, fists waving with cards of buttons, batteries, socks, stainless flatware. How much, please, how much? You take 5 cents, both for a quarter? Yes, I was saying, sure, 5 cents. You got 4, whatever. Tyrese had been watching the whole show from the roof of the porch next door since noon. He was the color of polished fruit wood. a compact, beautifully built man with a high round forehead and ironic mouth. The week before, he'd run out to help us pull the plastic over the furniture when it first rained. He and the landlady seemed to be on cordial terms, and I'd introduced myself on that day. Now he sidled up to me and asked me what I thought she'd take for a little oak table with fancy legs. It needed some help, a little glue, but I'd had my eye on it too. The sky was losing light, and it was nearly 8:30. "Offer her 7, I said. "Don't give her more than 8, 9 tops." "I can do that," he said. "I like that mirror too, and I've been wanting me a bookcase." He had a good eye. "Where are you from?" I asked, not placing his accent. "Jersey," he said, thumbing over the table of paperbacks. "Colorado, you know." 2 men in tennis clothes wandered up. The older man poked around the potted plants. The younger man went up on the porch to a blonde maple wardrobe, drawers below, shelves above, one of the few solid wood pieces, too heavy to carry out into the yard so it had been spared the ravages of rain. "I've got to have this, Don," he called to his friend. "How much, dear?" he asked me. The landlady wanted 70, but she was down by the street arguing with a young contractor over some flooring. 40? "I'm sure it's worth much more, but the truth is I'm broke, dear," the man said. "My ex is fucking me over for alimony after she got the house and car and the furniture, including my own shiffer robe just exactly like this one, which I've had since I was a boy." "The bitch," I said. "Exactly," he said. He had $25 on him, and his friend had a 10 and 2 ones. I took their money, and they staggered off with the chest. "Sly," said Tyrese, head down, still looking for books. "Just exactly whose side you on, anyway?" In the whole neighborhood, he was my only friend. I was incredibly isolated, part of nesting maybe, or as a result of postponing my career. I'd spent the previous 10 years getting, as they say, the terminal degree and teaching college here, there, in the evenings drinking and playing pool with a series of fascinating, impossible men, and eventually meeting and marrying my husband. All of a sudden, I look at my watch and notice it's almost 40 past. A year of panic, a couple of months of trying, and how strange that was after so many years of faithful contracepting, and I'm on the mommy track, which meant lots of moderate exercise, which meant walks, which meant meeting Tyrese, coming and going. He lived with his girlfriend, who was studying to be an LPN. He didn't appear to have a job, and it seemed indelicate to ask. He could generally be found lounging on the porch of the house next door, picking at the peeling flakes of stucco, and talking with a rich assortment of human beings. There was, for example, the blind Filipino guy, who claimed to be a cousin of Carol Burnett's houseboy. His blindness was heavy on him, and though he was cheerful, even jovial, he had trouble with the basics, counting streets, handling the white cane. He lived some blocks away and was a friend of the woman who lived in the first-floor apartment on the west side of Tyrese's building, Kiana. He often brought his guitar, which he played badly, and sat on the porch with Tyrese, smoking Vantage cigarettes, trying to play Wipeout, settling for House of the Rising Sun. His shin had large cardboard-colored bruises. Kiana was the mother of 4 and the girlfriend of a former dealer who'd done his time and was trying to complete the studies in air conditioning appliance repair which he'd begun in the joint. According to Tyrese, he was doing well in school but having trouble staying straight. "You can imagine," Tyrese said, "this is a man used to wearing $100 Nikes, 5-6 pounds of yellow gold on his neck, drive some kind of very nice ride, sleep late as he liked because he's going to be up all night with his bros, running, cutting his deals, talking that talk, you know, that little high voice dudes got when they bullshitting each other." I nodded. "He has a habit?" "Oh, I doubt it," said Tyrese. "He can't afford much habit on her ADC and his Pell Grant. I expect he toot now and then his friends lay it on him. He got to pee in the cup whenever his parole officer asks him to. More'n likely it's not the powder that's his Jones anyway. It's the running." The other first-floor apartment was inhabited by a short, fat black man whom I took at first for a small-time white slaver. He went everywhere on a 10-speed bicycle, which he rode or pushed, depending on whether his main squeeze, a pale white girl less than half his age, was trailing after him. She wore, it was abundantly clear, no underwear, and, weather permitting, a white terry cloth romper, strapless and short, so that despite its considerable dinginess, The delectable rim of ass which hung out was a real traffic stopper in the neighborhood. I was convinced that her man, possessed of an impressive corporation inside his bandlawn shirts and a loud, gravel-based Satchmo voice, had a Svengali-style hold on her because she seemed, well, drugged. She moved slowly, as if she walked through a denser, more viscous air than the rest of us. I watched her, fascinated, and when she tumbled to this, she made it a point to stare me down, turning on me a gaze that was somehow both stunned and arrogant, the enormous blue eyes of a truly crazy person. There was a third member of this group, a dreadful little red-haired wino, also a bicycler, whom I had encountered once years before in a crowded bar. It had been a Friday afternoon, the room jammed, and I'd found myself wedged between an aisle full of thirsty rugby players and the line of bar stools, trying to make conversation with an acquaintance under the white noise of the crowd, since we certainly couldn't talk over it. I'd grown slowly aware of something pressing into my backside, then that the something was an erect penis. I turned to look over my shoulder and into a wicked idiot grin in a seamed, dirty face, stringy red hair pushed back from a high forehead, not the kind of face a woman forgets. I told this story to Tyrese one day when he was complaining about the neighborhood. A shelled-out Victorian across the street had been rented in late fall to a family of bikers. "Pass a little white trash," said Tyrese, arms folded across his black T-shirt. "Little old starved-looking kids, woman with tattoos and a mean face, Confederate flag hanging in the picture window. Bikers. Pah!" He spit. "I got to move. I'm serious. One of those guys told me last night he knew where I could get some dollar acid." I said, "Dollar acid?" I said, "Thank you very much. I haven't any use for that shit at all, not since I left the service, you know. Mean to say I'm 35 years old, and you are trying to tell me about dollar acid?" And I told him something else. I said, "My friend," I said, "anybody tries to sell you dollar acid, that man does not have your health on his mind." He was more tolerant of the red-headed wino, or ex-wino, as it turned out. Those the people of the big book, AA. Of course, they all three of them post-toasties, gone and fried they sweetbreads long, long ago. The girl, too, I mean, she looks crazy, but she seems so young. Black dude, Henry, her old man, he say she get SSI, and you know you got to be doctor certified to collect. He say she is a bona fide schizophrenic, undifferentiated with a little catatonic on the side. Mercy. Hippie, the redhead, the one done poke you with his thing, his liver's gone, old Henry tell me, but he just been a bum all his life. Now Henry, he got his veteran's benefit, don't amount to much more than the rent, but he got the VA hospital to fall back on in case. But Hippie, he's a dying man. They say whiskey is about a 30-year ride. Now he got to collect aluminum cans to keep what little hold he got left. They don't need much, though. They go to their meetings, a different one every night. They live mostly on coffee and cigarettes, a little bologna, stale sweet rolls the food pantry give away. Jesus, I said, what a country. Shit, yes. So, imagine my dismay when I read in the paper one December morning that Tyrese had cut a man with a fish filleting knife the night before and was being held in lieu of bond on charges of assault. I saw his girlfriend, a pasty, heavy-set white woman about my own age, leaving for school. I thought of calling out to ask her what was up, but I'd only met her once and didn't like to pry. The party had raged until 3 a.m. the night before. Our bedroom on the near side of the house got maximum benefit from the music and later the shouting that came from Kiana's apartment. From what I'd observed, she was an attentive, somewhat stern mother, and as things heated up, I was imagining her shut up in a back room with her children, shushing them, rocking the littlest on her lap. When the screaming started, we debated calling the cops and decided against. Call it white liberal guilt. If it had been the rednecks across the way, I'd have been on the phone in a New York minute. Since it was black folks, though, we told ourselves to keep out. I mean, we couldn't be sure there was any real trouble. Certainly they were being inconsiderate, but after all, the oppressed have got to let off steam, right? Plus, what if one of them found out it was us who busted them? For 2 weeks, I saw no sign of Tyrese, either next door or in the paper. At last I came upon a paragraph naming a trial date and detailing the incident a little. He'd been defending his fiancée, his pregnant fiancée, from the attentions of another man at the party. I was approaching my own due date by then. I was housebound, bored, uncomfortable, and in the mood to fret. By the time my water broke at 4 a.m. on the morning of New Year's Eve, I'd all but convinced myself that it was all my fault. But white liberal guilt, though pervasive, isn't very stable. And the ecstasy and exhaustion of birth and new motherhood washed me cleaner than I'll ever be again. I gave no more thought to Tyrese until spring. And then, one day, unaccountably, he was just there. I met him one of the first days warm enough to take the baby out. We greeted warmly, but he did not mention his trouble, and I didn't ask. He was full of questions about the baby, the birth, baby food and furniture, and even more complaints about the neighborhood. "I got to move," he said with conviction. "These landlords driving me crazy. You know how they ain't no screens on the east side upstairs across from my place? Last tenant abandoned the place just before y'all move in. Landlord too cheap and feeble to fix it up. Just holding her furniture and clothes like they worth something to somebody. And in the meantime, the squirrels have found themselves an open window and been filling the place up with nuts. Roll, nuts rolling all night long, all day too. Squirrels don't sleep." I didn't know that. "I got a night job, just until I can find something better. Roll. It's not loud, but dang. Sounds bad. Not to mention the family arguments. Squirrels got a terrible home life, you know that? Can't nobody agree with nobody else. Probably arguing about who moved whose nuts where. Bottom line, it ain't no place for a kid. My friend Abdul, guy walks by with a little tiny boy, he say some dingleberry got a pit bull tied on a piece of clothesline right out front 2 streets over. I knew Abdul, a tall, high yellow man with enormous white sneakers and immense gentleness. He used to want him a pit bull. He used to think he was bad. Now his old lady, she's studying up to be a court reporter, and old Abdul, he can't stand the sight of no pit bull, or dobe, or Rottweiler. People keep them kind of dogs as crazy, Abdul telling me. A dog like that is no better than a shark on land, and the people as keep them is nuts. Abdul said they ought to lock up the people and shoot the dog. I tell him it's the other way around. He say maybe. The door of the redneck house across the street banged open, and the head of the household, a dirty blonde man called Jerry, came out on the porch. "Oh no," said Tyrese, "here he come. Fool think him and me is friends because I have never actually peed on his shoes." Jerry did indeed cross the street to us. "Damn landlord," he began. "I'm going to sue the fucker if you don't put bars on the windows." "What's happening?" said Tyrese politely, studying the distance. "Our little girl fell clean out the window." "Oh, Jesus, the one that's about 2? She landed in some lilac bushes out back. She's pretty cut up, but not bad hurt. Tell you what, my old lady liked to skin me, though." "You supposed to be watching the baby?" "Yeah, and I was. Only my man, he come by, you know, and we had us some business to cut up, and then we was trying to kick back, you know, and the little shit kept running in and out, till finally I told her to shut the fuck up or I'd put her in a room. She started to talk back to me, and I won't put up with that, so I slammed her butt right in her room." "And she fell out the window," said Tyrese dryly. "No screams, right?" "Little shit," said Jerry, aggravated, "between her and the fucking landlord." When he'd gone, after trying to sell us some black beauties, we sat down on my front step so I could nurse my baby. "Shit," said Tyrese. "Look like the brothers be teaching the rednecks how to be shiftless." He spit. My child, everyone agrees, was an exceptionally beautiful baby. Round and lithe, milk and roses coloring, large dark eyes, delicate curl of the shell-pink ear. Though he wasn't quite 4 months old, he hated wearing anything on his feet and continually scuffed his heels together to get foot freedom. This day he'd lost one sock and nearly got shut of the other, which I pocketed. "Look at his feet," said Tyrese, and took one in his hand. "I know what you mean," I said. "It's the toes." He nodded. We sat there, out of character it seemed, because silent. The trees were still largely bare. The first leaf just a green suggestion, like an impressionist painting. In front of Tyrese's house, a 40-foot pin oak stood full of last year's brown leaves and rattled in the wind. At the bright sound of each gust, my baby would strain harder at the nipple and raise his head a little as if to look around. "Old Abdul got it all wrong," Tyrese said at last. "Oh, come on," I said. "I agree with him about the pit bulls, and he sure looks like a good daddy to me." "Well, not all wrong," Tyrese admitted, "but he read them self-help books, you know. Abdul, he told me he fixin' to commit to prosperity. You ever hear that? He say it is the only surefire legal way for a black man to get rich in this country. Like famous Amos and all that. Power positive thinking. Oh, yeah? Abdul, he want to scratch him up some rental property, like the hippie would own your house. What she got, 15, 20 apartments? Something like that. Old Abdul, he been studying on the thing, and he believed the best investment is in low-income housing. Do what little upkeep himself. You know poor folks can't be too picky." Tyrese stood and gestured down the street. "Speaking of which, there go my landlords now. Nice talking with you. I got to try to see about them squirrels." The Herdlickas were indeed leaving a dilapidated painted lady, another of their properties, a half block down and across the street, climbing phlegmatically into their green pickup. He was a thick-bodied, bullet-headed Czech and apparently had emphysema to judge from his rich and constant cough. She was small and gray and beat down. According to Tyrese, they owned a dozen houses, all fire traps, roach-riddled, which they blandly refused to repair and rented to an endless stream of near-destitute. Tyrese called out to them and waved. She turned and caught sight of him, then turned back to her husband and pointed to Tyrese. The truck started with a shudder and began to back slowly into the street. Tyrese called again, jogging toward them. The truck stopped, then lurched forward, and Tyrese began to run. He chased them down the street for 2 blocks, shouting, the truck gradually picking up speed, the missus turning anxiously to watch through the gun rack. I shifted my dozing baby in my arms and watched Tyrese walk back. When he rejoined me on the steps, he was still blowing like a horse after a steeplechase. "You see that?" I admitted I had. "It ain't right," he said. "No." "And senility ain't no excuse." "No." "And Abdul, he don't get the point." "Which is?" "World don't need no nigger landlords. World don't need landlords at all. Kids just need a decent place to grow and something they can want to grow up to be besides landlords." Amen. I'm serious. Before my baby come, I got to move. And he did. Thank you for being patient.